Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all well. We're super excited to be here today. Well, I especially am, along with our fantastic panel that we have today. Welcome to our webinar, How Recruiters Can Support Neurodiverse Candidates by jobs.ac.uk, an international job board for careers in higher education, as well as a dedicated career advice source with resources, articles, and webinars. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, brilliant. Sorry, I just saw a message go in there that somebody couldn't. Brilliant. Okay, perfect. So a dedicated careers advice source with resources, articles and webinars on how to support you all on your career journey. As I said, we've assembled a fantastic panel of individuals to discuss the topic and help us gain an insight into barriers that neurodiverse candidates might face during the recruitment process and what you can do as a recruiter to support them. So I'm going to get our panelists to introduce themselves and let us know a little bit about their backgrounds to start off with. But I will introduce myself. I'm Shazia Hussain and I will be your host today. I'm neurodiverse myself, and I have been working in the corporate and the business sector for the last 15 years. I'm a recruiter by trade, so I've had a lot of experience in terms of how to build diverse talent pools onto corporate teams. And to give you some context about my neurodiversity, I was actually diagnosed in my late 30s. So I went through my whole entire education with actually not knowing how to read and write. But I managed to graduate with a degree, and I have many different aspects of neurodiversity. So dyslexia, dyspraxia, a memory issue, along with ADHD. And I have been advocating for neurodiverse colleagues to get the correct support and the reasonable adjustments that are needed for everybody to maximise on their potential. I also did a TED talk on why neurodiversity is my superpower. So please keep your eyes peeled out for that one. It's going to be a very good one. And I will hand it over to Alex.
Hello everyone, I'm Alex Manners, I'm 27 and I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when I was back in primary school, so when I was 10 years old, and I now have my own business where I go all over the UK and sometimes even the world. Now we can do things online, presenting talks all about what it's like to live with Asperger's and autism, to work with it, why I look upon it as something positive. And I present talks to loads of different businesses, schools, law firms, hospitals, anywhere and everywhere. I've also written and published my own book called That's Not Right, My Life Living with Asperger's, which is available on Amazon if anyone wants to grab a copy. And I was also a radio presenter. I had my own children's radio show for 2 years. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much. I think it's over to David now.
Thank you, Shazia. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm David. I'm an inclusion and wellbeing specialist trainer, consultant for the Employers Network for Equality and Inclusion, as well as Embed Inclusion. I also happen to be neurodivergent, surprisingly. There are lots of us around. Originally, I was a specialist educational needs and trauma-informed educator, and I champion the right of every individual to achieve their fullest potential so they're not held back by limiting labels that are imposed upon them by others. I'm here today because I believe we all have the right to achieve our potential personally and professionally in life.
Thank you so much, David. And least but not last, I can't remember the saying actually, but Rachel, over to you.
Hi everyone, thanks Shazia, and thanks to the team for inviting me today. I am a late diagnosed ADHD autistic woman. My pronouns are she and her. I am white, middle-aged, and I'm wearing a black polo neck because I think it makes me look like Steve Jobs. It doesn't. I run my own neurodiversity consultancy, Sparkle Class. I've done a TEDx talk on autism. I've written a book on how to treat autistic people. I say book, it's more of a pamphlet really. You can download it off my website for free, sparkleclass.com. And I run my own company, like I said. Like Alex, I go all around the UK and do talks internationally on inclusion, how important inclusion is, and so on. And I'm very excited about today's panel. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope you find it useful.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So just to give an overview of what we're going to be discussing today for everyone, some of the talking points are going to be around what is neurodiversity? So this term that everyone's talking about, we're going to learn what it means today. We're going to become aware of some of the challenges that neurodiverse candidates might face and discover ways you can adapt the recruitment process to be inclusive as well as explore the benefits of a neurodiverse workplace and get first-hand experience from our panel, including myself as well. So the first question is, so what is neurodiversity? This like topical term that seems to be floating around everywhere at the moment. What is autism, for example? Alex and Rachel, any ideas?
Yeah, shall I have a go at answering that one first? So autism is a hidden disability that affects how we communicate with others and how we make sense of the world around us. So everyone with autism is different. And as the famous saying goes, once you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So everyone is completely different with it. However, there are some common traits that many of us or many people with autism may have. And these include things such as difficulties with communication and understanding things like jokes, facial expressions and sarcasm, highly focused interests, high levels of stress, sensory difficulties. So we may have be under or oversensitive to things such as sounds and smells. And we also may have a love of routine. And autism is something that people will have for life as well. So it's something that won't ever go away. We just might be able to be better or become better at managing some of the challenges that we may face as we get older. But yeah, that's just a little bit about what autism is.
That's so great. Rachel, any input on that?
Yeah, you'll find when you look at official descriptions of autism, it's all rooted in deficit-based language, but like Alex said, it's not a deficit, it's a different. So my own autism diagnosis, which I got when I was 46, it said my language is too formal and I've got deficits in communication, even though I literally teach it. And it also said I make inappropriate overtures. I don't even know what that means. Are they talking about the marriage of Figaro or what? But it's not, and that's what we get a lot of. We get told that there's something wrong with us, but there isn't. It's just that we're different from the vast majority of people. It's a bit like being in a play and everyone else has got a script, but you haven't. That's kind of what it feels like. The description of autism that I like the most comes from the Maoris, you know, the people in New Zealand. Their word for autism translates as in their own time and place. And I love that because it's not only more accurate than a lot of the official descriptions that we hear, it's also much more reflective of the way in which we see the world.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I really like that definition as well. What about ADHD?
ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. You can have type 1, which is the more hyperactive kind that most people are familiar with, or type 2, which is the inattentive kind, the daydreamer staring out of the window kind. And I have actually got combined, which is type 1 and type 2 at the same time. So ADHD, imagine an airport. ADHD is like that, except all the planes are fighter jets. There's no air traffic control, and for some reason there's a boat. So although we have a lot of power, we have a lot of energy, and we have quite a lot of drive, we don't have very good ways of controlling that. So some strengths with ADHD might be things like speed, hyperfocus, problem-solving ability, creativity is another one. But some of the challenges that we have are being forgetful, easily distracted, disorganized. Did I say forgetful? Just my little joke. But yeah, the effect of that, the effect of having ADHD and having those challenges is that we can suffer from a lot of guilt. You will find people with ADHD tend to be quite people-pleasing. We're trying to make up for our deficits by being overly people-pleasing, which doesn't do us any good. And we can quite often have relationship issues, and a lot of ADHD people, like autistic people, have mental health issues. And like all neurodivergent conditions, ADHD is not a deficit, it's a difference. And like all conditions, one of the main reasons we struggle is because we're trying to get along in a world that just wasn't built for us.
And just to add on to that, I think that with ADHD as well, one of the personality traits is addictive. They can be quite addictive, addicted to particular things. And I myself have got quite an addictive personality. And one of the ways that I've managed that is just through getting addicted to really good stuff that's going to make my brain feel better, like, you know, eat better food, exercise a lot, you know. But yeah, I think addiction is really important to kind of like mention there as well. So what is dyslexia and dyspraxia? From my understanding of dyslexia, it primarily, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, but it primarily affects spelling and reading. And dyspraxia is actually one of my favorites. It's you have issues with like coordination. I actually like suffer with visual spatial awareness. So it's like sometimes I can be seemingly quite clumsy, and I've done things like, you know, I thought the amount of times that I've fallen down in like major investment banks on like trade floors, and everyone's just been like, oh, you know, it's the ditzy, you know, stereotypical kind of, you can be stereotyped into that ditzy female role. And I kind of masked some of my dyspraxia just through kind of, you know, finding humor in it. But, you know, really, I think that I think it's really important to kind of mention the fact that, you know, it is an invisible disability, and sometimes we do need to be mindful about what we're actually like laughing at, and, you know, internally as well, like, you know, it's okay to just say, actually, do you know what, I'm dyspraxic, and sometimes it's like I struggle with coordination. But any thoughts, David?
Yeah, thank you, Shazia. I like all neurotypes, understanding of the different neurotypes. I think sometimes there's a very surface, superficial understanding of what they are. And like you say, dyslexia, yes, it primarily affects reading and writing skills, and some people just leave their knowledge base at that. It's actually also, it can be a difficulty processing or remembering information. It can impact on areas such as organizational skills, or what people call executive functioning skills. But, you know, like Rachel was saying, I think it's really important to highlight the strengths which are often overlooked when it comes to dyslexia, dyspraxia. And when it comes to dyslexic individuals, I was doing a bit of research recently. 69,000 self-made millionaires were surveyed. 40% were found to show traits of dyslexia. So, you know, 1 in 10 people are dyslexic, and those people have that kind of creative thinking, soft power skills, good people skills, team building skills, so many strengths that are often overlooked because we're too busy looking at what the challenges might be. And then with dyspraxia, like you say, people used to refer to it as a kind of clumsy child syndrome and think you would grow out of it, which of course you never do. But there are things we can do to support those who are dyspraxic, you know, repetitive behaviors, repetitive actions, getting used to how an activity works or how something is done. But something that I guess a lot of people may not be as aware of with dyspraxia is that some dyspraxic individuals, and I always say some or may or might, because, you know, as Alex says, we're all individuals, some may present atypical responses to sensory inputs. So in terms of their autistic responses that you would normally perhaps expect are common also in some dyspraxic individuals. So these neurotypes are far more complex than we might initially be aware of.
Well, that's really interesting, David. I'm going to move on now to advertising. And if anybody has any thoughts around how we can make our job adverts more accessible, for example, job descriptions and application forms as well. Does anyone have any ideas on that?
Rachel, did you want to go first on that? I think you've got some great insights to share.
Thanks, David. Yeah, there's a lot you can do to make your ad inclusive, and the more you do, the more it's planting green flags for neurodivergent people. So you're demonstrating inclusion through the way you write your ad, rather than just putting at the bottom, we are inclusive, which is what a lot of people are still doing. So one thing that you can do, which is really easy, is just make it shorter. So that's much easier for dyslexic people to read, and it's also, some dyslexic people will just see a wall of text and, you know, computer says no. It's easier for people with ADHD, it's easier for busy people, it's easier for people who might have English as a second language. So once you start making those ads inclusive for neurodivergent people, you're actually helping a lot more individuals once you do things like make the ad shorter, and you can make it clearer as well. Clarity is a really big thing for neurodivergent people. So as an example, you'll see this a lot in job ads. It says great communication skills. What does that mean? Is it written communication, which dyslexic people may struggle with, or is it verbal communication, which some autistic people may struggle with? There's a world of difference between doing a presentation and making small talk around the water cooler, or leading a meeting or participating in a meeting. So the clearer you are and the shorter your ad, the more inclusive it will be. And when you do that, you're starting to attract the right sort of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, any thoughts?
Yeah, 100% agree with you. I would go right back to making sure you've got an accessibility toolbar to begin with, which can alter the text size, the background, can read text aloud. That in itself is a great starting point. And Rachel's already covered a lot in relation to dyslexia and how those adjustments will benefit so many others. So I would say also then let's focus on autistic applicants, for example, being logical, simple, logical sentences, step-by-step instructions, literal language. Make sure that the navigational tools are there. People will click away from websites. Is it something like 70% of people will click away from your website if they can't navigate it easily? So any business needs to sort their website out and keep business coming in. You're missing out on so much business, and you're missing out on so many good applicants if people can't navigate their way through the initial stages of the application process.
And what are some of the difficulties a neurodiverse candidate might have with job application, Alex?
I think, you know, people with autism often do find that the application process of filling in maybe a form, it can be really challenging. And I think one of the things that we find challenging is a lot of application forms nowadays list a set bullet pointed list of criteria that we have to have for that particular job. And if we think that maybe we haven't got one of those skills, even if we've got 7 out of 8 of those skills, even if there's just one that we maybe think, oh no, we don't have that skill or we can't do that, just that one thing will put us off sometimes actually applying for that particular job. So I always say that when you're listing the criteria for the job, be really specific and actually think about if all those things are actually essential for the job. And if they're not essential, don't include them, because you're actually missing out on a lot of talent. Because people with autism will think, I don't have that particular skill, I won't apply for the job, because we have very black and white ways of thinking, very rigid ways of thinking sometimes. And also sometimes when you're on an application form, when you've got a space for someone to answer the question, sometimes that space, often I found, isn't big enough to actually write down the information that you want. And I know for a lot of my friends with autism, they would just finish what they were saying, and if there wasn't enough room to write what they wanted, they would just miss out the bits that they couldn't fit into that particular box or that particular section of the application form. So I would also think about the actual space you've got for writing the answers, because again, by not including enough space, you may be missing out on vital pieces of information. And I think the last thing I would say is I always think it's a really great idea when there's on application processes a place where people can actually mention if they have any requirements that they may need if they were to go for an interview or if they were to get the job. But make sure that if you are asking if there's any requirements, actually give an example of of adaptations or things that you put in place for other people, because sometimes just saying, are there any adaptations that may be useful for you should you get the interview or should you get the job, that's too vague a vague question, and we won't know what to put. So being really specific with the questions that you're asking, and also giving examples of things that may have been put in place for other people, can really help us to understand the kind of things that can be adapted for us. So I hope that's there's a few things there that are really useful.
Super insightful, and I can already see that the chat box is we're getting lots and lots of questions there. So obviously it's really insightful, this conversation, which is brilliant. How can we attract more neurodivergent talent, Rachel?
Well, one way obviously is to do all these things that we've been talking about, make the ads inclusive, make the application forms inclusive, because the more you do that, the more people are going to come to you when they can see you're being inclusive by the way you set out your ad and the way you've arranged your application form. And if you've put in, like Alex was saying, not just can we do anything, but what specifically you can offer. Because I see this every day, that you have job ads that say, we really care about diversity and inclusion, at the end of like a three-page job ad. If you need anything, please contact us. And that tells me that they don't really care about diversity and inclusion because they haven't thought of the things before. So if you're listening to this and you're starting to implement some of those things, then people shouldn't necessarily have to contact you with their special needs. And if they do, you've got, like Alex was saying, you've got that list of things already. And the reason for that is because you're not making anyone else do it. You're making neurodivergent people and other disabled people do extra work that you should have thought of. You don't say to, people without a neurodivergent condition or without a disability, tell me, if you need the address or, something simple, or you need to know the process or whatever it might be. So when you do it for neurodivergent people, it's stigmatizing and it kind of separates us. When you get a process that works for everyone, what we call systemic inclusion, that's a huge draw for neurodivergent people. And another thing that's a brilliant way of attracting neurodivergent talent is if you have neurodivergent people in your company already who are open about their neurodiversity, recommending your company to other job applicants. And I know a number of companies have quite successful referral programs because of this. When people know that your company is a great company to work for, a safe culture, an open culture where people can be themselves, you're going to get neurodivergent banging your door down, wanting to work for you, because it's still not the norm. It will be one day, but if you want to stay one step ahead, then building that inclusive culture is a really important way to attract that neurodivergent talent.
That's excellent, Rachel. So I'm going to move on to the interviewing and the hiring part of the process. Now, how can organisations make interview tasks, for example, like preparing a presentation, more equitable for a neurodiverse candidate? Alex, any thoughts on this?
Yes, I think there are loads of ways that you can make an interview more accessible for people who are neurodiverse or may have autism. I think, as was mentioned before, if you're making something accessible and inclusive for people who are neurodiverse, then most of the time we'll be making it inclusive for everyone, because some of the things, I may need may be exactly the same things that somebody who maybe doesn't have autism also might find useful. So just think that when you're making things accessible for people who are neurodiverse, who have autism, you're probably making them accessible for lots of people as well. I always say one thing you can always do is, if there are any questions that are going to be asked during the interview, writing those down and giving them to the candidate before they go into the interview, or just putting them in front of them when the interview starts, just gives that person a chance to, you know, be familiar with the things that are going to be asked when the interview begins. Or and sometimes it may be difficult to know the exact questions you're going to ask that individual until the interview begins. But even just writing down the topics that are going to be discussed, that will also help that individual to be a little bit more familiar with what might be going on during the interview, so they have a little bit more understanding and can prepare a little bit better. Also, in an interview, there are so many different things that specifically I would find really challenging. For example, certain sounds, you know, the light coming through a window, the glare from a screen. Having a choice of where to sit is really important, because I know when I go into an interview, I like to position myself in front of a window, lots of light coming through, or in front of a big screen with lots of glare coming from it, so that the things that may affect me during the interview or make me lose concentration are, as they say, out of sight and out of mind. So having a choice of where to sit means I can position myself in the most comfortable position in the room for myself.
Brilliant. David, any thoughts?
Yeah, and thanks, Alex. That's really, really insightful and really useful, I think, what you've just shared there. And it shows how individual we all are. I think back to my time as a teacher and how differentiation was always the buzzword, and it was so important to differentiate. But when it came to assessing at the end of a school year, perhaps, they all had to do the same test in the same way, which was ridiculous. And it's the same when it comes to interviews. We are expecting everyone to conform in certain ways to fit in, when actually that means we're missing out on so much talent if we just assume people can do things. That idea of normalcy, that if I can do it, so can everyone else. Well, it's not the case, you know. So you're asking about things like giving a presentation, preparing a presentation as part of the interview, or a skills assessment. For dyslexic applicants, those with ADHD, dyspraxia, they may be really effective verbal communicators, but they might, as we already said, find preparing something like a PowerPoint presentation to be more challenging. On the reverse of that, I guess, when you consider an autistic candidate may be really skillfully able to create a detailed presentation, but might struggle to present in a way that is seen as confident in kind of the perceived way of what confidence looks like. So we have to be flexible, allow the individual to present in the way that is best for them. I always encourage people to communicate in any scenario in the way that is most comfortable for them, so that we can really harness the skills, the experience, the knowledge of each person individually. It's up to the recruiter, it's up to us as employers to be flexible, to differentiate, be flexible, offer a range of creative options for applicants, perhaps pre-record, voice record, video presentations, for example, or verbal in-person presentations if necessary at all for the job that they're applying for, with an option then to use visual, multi-sensory communication that doesn't rely solely on a PowerPoint presentation or doing it in a certain specific manner that is not right for that individual. It's about getting the best out of each person.
Yeah, brilliant. I always get asked as a recruiter, actually, in my job, is it enough to just share interview questions with neurodiverse candidates during the interview process to make it equitable for those candidates and the ones that are not neurodiverse as well? And so I'm going to ask, like, what are your thoughts in terms of, like, what do you think is enough to make the interviewing process equitable and fair for neurodiverse candidates as well as the ones who are not? My personal thoughts on this is that it's not always sufficient to just give candidates a list of pre-submitted questions, because we need to consider specific and individual needs rather than just bumbling everyone into like one group. Because, you know, all of us here today, we've got different aspects of neurodiversity and we're all different as well. I myself, I'm a woman of colour as well. We've got like, you know, we've got different demographics. We've got different like, you know, like intersectionality, I think is something that needs to be considered to individual needs. And I always say that we need to think about like sensory environments, make sure that we've got clear communication, and for anybody that needs that extra time and flexibility. But Rachel, do you think that sharing a copy of the interview questions with neurodiverse candidates is enough or equitable during the interview process? And is it relative to candidates who are not neurodiverse as well? That's a bit of a long-winded question, but does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Shazia. Well, I think, yeah, we've talked about sharing the interview questions in advance, and it does help. And that's something that you do for everyone as your inclusive process. You do it for everybody. But I don't think it goes far enough, because we can also change the interview questions to be clearer. And this is called semantic prompting, when you ask a question to get the answer that you want more clearly. And there's a really good example of how well this works from Katie Maris, who is a professor at the University of Bath. She did an experiment with autistic people in job interviews, and she had a group of autistic people and a group of non-autistic people, and she put them through a standard interview process. Now, as they expected, the autistic people didn't do very well. They weren't giving the recruiters what they wanted. Then they changed the interview questions so they were clearer for the autistic people. So, for example, instead of saying, tell me about yourself, which is an open-ended question and one that some people, autistic or not, might find tricky to answer, they said, tell me about your role. Tell me about some of your key responsibilities. Much clearer and closed-ended. And instead of saying something like, are you good at problem solving? Because an autistic person might just say yes. They would say, tell me about a problem you faced and how you solved it. Much clearer. So they changed the questions, and then they put these two groups through the process again. And as they expected, the autistic people did a lot better. But what they also found was that the non-autistic cohort also did better. So it's a really clear example of how systemic inclusion works for everyone. You change your processes to help neurodivergent people, and everybody benefits. And the other part about this is that you found the autistic people kind of went up by a greater degree in how they performed than the neurotypical. So what it did, they had this gap between autistic and neurotypical, and when they changed the questions to make them more autism friendly, although everyone went up, the autistic people went up more, and it was closing that gap. And that's what we're doing when we're doing neurodiverse, inclusive, friendly recruiting. We're not giving special things to special people, we're leveling the playing field.
And that brings us on to our next question. So how do you answer someone who says we're just hiring the best person for the job, regardless of race, gender and diversity? And I'm just going to add my own 2 pennies worth into this, just as a woman of colour and a woman that is neurodivergent, working in both the business and the corporate sector in talent attraction as well. This question, I think it's something that's asked a lot, and for me it almost kind of assumes that actually that diverse talent pool is actually less skilled. It is assuming that when that is not the case, and that is something that I've found out many times. I think that the most important thing for me here is that it's a commitment to hiring the best person for the job based on merit, right? And it really is crucial to the performance of any single team on any single business function that we have a diverse range of skill sets, right? Because they complement each other, and it basically benefits the entire organization, having different people from different backgrounds contributing different things, because it's like that's where true innovation comes, and that's where the best businesses out there, any single organization that you want to work for, are the ones that are promoting this inclusive culture of let's hire like diverse talent, right? Because they understand when different minds and different people come together, you know, that's when great ideas are born. We don't want teams of people. I always say in my recruitment roles, I don't want to see the same types of people on floors, you know. It's like we need different races, we need gender, we need sexual orientation, we need disability, we need invisible disability, neurodiversity. But yeah, I think it's really, really important to highlight that it's about bringing in diverse skills, and that can often level like playing fields and actually make a much more wonderful working environment for everyone. David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, most definitely, 100% with you on that. Absolutely. You know, the more diverse an organization, the more likely it is to outperform its competitors. And that's that entire range of diverse personalities that we're going to get. And isn't it far more interesting anyway? We all too often don't get the right person for the job because we've got this unconsciously biased application process. We need to make the recruitment process accessible from start to finish, from job descriptions through to the onboarding. So we get this broader range of diverse applicants through the door, and we'll get candidates who've been overlooked, who've been disadvantaged, but who are going to bring these, as you say, Shazia, these invaluable skills, these unique perspectives to the organisation. The onus, again, I get a bit boring, is on the recruiter to ensure that there is fair and objective processes in place at every single stage along the way, so that any potential barriers, we need to be proactively thinking about possible potential barriers that there might be and how to remove those.
Absolutely. And yeah, the emphasis is on the recruiters, and that's why it's really important and critical that, you know, organizations do have you know, like educated recruiters, people that know about unconscious bias, know how to bring in diverse talent as well. It's really critical to the growth and the success of a business, and I've seen it time and time again. But just moving on from that question, how can we make the interview process more accessible through adaptations, Alex?
I think, you know, first and foremost, as we've mentioned before, you know, changing the way we do an interview is really important. I think for a lot of people specifically with autism, even if they had the skills required to do the job they were going for really, really well, a lot of people with autism don't get jobs. The statistic is that only 16% of people with autism are in full-time employment, and only 32% of people with autism are in some kind of paid role. And that statistic is shocking, considering how many wonderful skills we can bring to a workplace. I mean, just the fact that we have a brain that's wired differently can mean that we can carry out tasks in different ways, meaning that we may be able to complete them in a quicker time frame or in more detail. And I know there was one company that I read about recently, and instead of giving the candidates that traditional interview process, they allowed them to build Lego robots, because they were then able to assess the skills that individual would need to use if they were to get the job. So it was a much better way of actually assessing the skills that the candidate would need or would use should they get the job, rather than giving them a traditional interview process, which actually didn't work for the candidate because they didn't perform well. It meant that they were much less likely to get the job because they didn't perform well in the interview. Then that had a knock-on effect for the company, because they wouldn't have been able to get the best person for the job. So I think changing the way you look at how an interview is carried out is really important. I think some of the interviews I've gone into, some of the ones I felt the most comfortable, is when people have been talking to me about maybe something that I'm interested in, my special interests. I'm obsessed with football, and I know when people have adapted the questions in the interview to football, or when they've been speaking to me maybe before the interview begins about the things that I'm interested in, I've been then a lot more open during the interview because I felt a lot more relaxed. So again, that's another way of adapting the interview. And again, you can do that with someone who's got autism, someone who hasn't got autism. You can really do that with anybody that you're interviewing. And it's such a quick and easy way of making that candidate feel more comfortable.
Yeah, that's brilliant. How can we support employees who show signs of neurodiversity at work, but who haven't disclosed it? And I've been guilty of that myself, like in the earlier part of, well, for the most part of my career, I never disclosed my neurodiversity. But Rachel, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a really important question, because we know that around 3/4 of people don't disclose at the interview stage. If they're 3/4 of neurodivergent people don't disclose that they're worried about stigma. I mean, it's still very much stigmatized. You know, we can't all afford to risk not getting a job because people are prejudiced. But if we start doing the things that we've been talking about, those interview adaptations, the application adaptations, reaching out to neurodivergent talent, demonstrating inclusion, people aren't going to have to disclose in order for you to support them. And that's brilliant, because it also means that people who don't know they're neurodivergent but know they have struggles, and we know there are a lot of adults who are neurodivergent who don't know, particularly women, and so you're going to be able to support them as well when you make these adaptations. We've talked a lot about how they're not just benefiting autistic people or dyslexic people or dyspraxics, they benefit everybody. So if you've got an inclusive process, you won't need people to disclose. And the good thing about that is, if you are very inclusive, if you're building that safe culture, people are going to disclose anyway. That's called proactive disclosure. When they come to you and disclose, it's much, much better for you and them and your company generally than a reactive disclosure when they have to disclose because of normally something because it's gone wrong. And something else I'd like to say about onboarding, you know, we've talked about recruitment, and then when there's the onboarding, we've talked about adaptations and challenges and so on, and we do have a lot of challenges. We live in a world that wasn't built for us, but we have a lot of strengths and talents and abilities, and we are sometimes slowed down by processes when we can go a lot faster. I mentioned there's a speed with ADHD, particularly speed in picking things up. Autistic people are known to onboard quickly. In fact, JP Morgan Chase had an autism hiring work program, and they found that autistic people were onboarding in 1/8 of the time of neurotypicals. 1/8 the time is a lot quicker. So when you're supporting neurodivergence at work, it's not just about you know, managing challenges and so on. It's also about letting them work the way they want to, letting them go fast if that's what they're good at, letting them be more efficient, and then you really get to have people shine.
Yeah, and I'd really like to touch on one point that you just made as well there, Rachel, because I think it is really important. For people who have symptoms of neurodiversity but actually don't have a diagnosis, or like don't officially know that they are neurodiverse, I actually was very surprised at how expensive the test is actually to actually get that diagnosis. It's extremely expensive, and I certainly know that my diagnosis was probably missed because I came from an underprivileged background in Yorkshire, where, you know, I didn't get the support that I needed. But, you know, my parents, had they even known that, you know, there was an issue around, like, you know, the way that I was learning, certainly they would not have had the means to put me through that assessment. So I really want to shine a light on the fact that there are lots of people, especially from minority groups, that, you know, still have like a kind of like larger to be around. Okay, well, you know, I come from a very academic family. My siblings are doctors and lawyers. You know, my dad, the teachers were telling my dad that I was stupid. You know, I just couldn't learn, and nobody thought that actually, you know what, maybe I was struggling because I was neurodivergent, or I needed different support, right? Like, I'm a visual learner, there's different things that come into play. But I really do want to mention the fact that there will be lots of people, even at, you know, like my age and older, that might not have had the means to actually get themselves diagnosed as well. So I think that as organisations, we need to be mindful that, you know, not everybody does have a diagnosis, and some people could be struggling and not even know, you know, like what the issue is. And I think that that's something that we really do need to kind of like highlight and be mindful of, because everybody deserves the correct support, not just the ones that have the means to actually get that diagnosis. It's like, you know, I really have always said it's a very privileged diagnosis, having been through that assessment and paying for it myself at, you know, a point where I could afford to do that. But I just wanted to kind of like highlight that as well. But just moving on from that question as well. So when it comes to the employees, how do we support them? What about managers that have neurodiversity? How do we support them, David?
Supporting managers, I mean, those who are neurodivergent themselves. I guess then it's other colleagues, HR. We need to, because as you say, older people. I'm not saying all managers are older people, but adult assessments didn't come in for ADHD, for example, until was it 2009, maybe 2007, in that area. And the same for autism. Also, the criteria is based on the typical behaviours of a 6 to 12-year-old boy, which is not most of us, certainly not in the workplace. So there are going to be older generations of employees who are in a management position, who are neurodivergent, who don't necessarily know it themselves, but they will have developed their own strategies, which is what all of us had to do, because neurodiversity wasn't even a concept going back to my school days. It was just you're put in special classes. Not that I was, academically I was okay, but I was just very socially awkward. But beyond that, yeah, managers need specific support themselves, because it may perhaps impact upon their interactions with colleagues, depending on what neurotype they have. When it comes to colleagues who are neurodivergent, I would say we don't need anyone to disclose their neurodivergence in order for us to perhaps just assume that there will be neurodivergent people there in the organisation, more than statistically you imagine there will be. Much as we're trying to recruit more, there will be a lot of neurodivergent employees who don't even know themselves that they are. So we just look at what they're struggling with, if anything, and find strategies to support them in a compassionate, empathetic way, whoever they happen to be.
I love that. I really do, because it just really comes back to the fact that, it's about like human support, right? It's about, I would say, IQ, like people have that and lots of people have it. And then there's EQ, emotional intelligence. And I think that this is something that's really vital. Again, in any single business of any single functioning organization, it's like, do you know what? We need more EQ, right? Like empathy is something that I really value in environments that I work in. So look, we are coming to the end now, so I'm going to have to kind of move things on along. But so one of the final questions is, what are the positives of having neurodiverse employees within the workplace? And I'm just going to open it up to everybody here. So Rachel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. Well, there are lots. I mean, we've got lots and lots of evidence that neurodiverse. When I say that, I mean, when we have a lot of different types of people in the workplace, they're more productive and more profitable. We've got tons of evidence. Employee retention's better, perception of leadership's better, tons of things. But for me personally, the biggest one is fun. It is so fun working with neurodivergent colleagues. And also, when I talk about my own workplace, we have neurotypical people I work with as well. And just having that balance, having all these different people, the people who work almost in an opposite way from the way I do, it's just a lot of fun. We create great work together, our training programs and so on. And yeah, I just really enjoy it.
Thanks so much, Rachel. David?
I totally echo that. I think back to my schooling when I was teaching specialist educational needs. It was the most vibrant, exciting, creative environment, and bringing that into workplace is what we need to do, to have all those different minds. Of course, there is, like you say, increased productivity, creativity, innovation, all of that. Different thinking styles will bring different ways to overcome challenges that we might be facing. But honestly, it is just to create an environment that replicates the wider world and can be the most engaging and fun place to be. If we were all the same, how dull would it be?
That's right. I'm a big believer in that. Alex?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you all have been saying. I go to a youth club for people who have autism, and I never have so much fun. I never smile so much as when I'm in that group, because you know, everyone is just so fantastic, and some of the things they come out with are just they're just funny. They're just so insightful. It's just one of the best places I ever get the chance to go to. You know, I have Asperger's, and I always say that my Asperger's brings along, as I call them, Asperger's superpowers. You know, things that I can do that maybe other people can't do as well as me. Being able to stand up and speak in front of large groups of people, you know, is one of them. Being able to think of things that, you know, bamboozle my family sometimes. You know, it's those types of things, and I prefer to look upon my diagnosis personally as a superpower. You know, as an ability rather than a disability.
Absolutely. I will say that in all the organisations I've worked for, where I felt the most supported, it has been in organisations where, you know, like neurodiversity is supported, and, you know, the environments there where people are talking about, oh, you know, I've got ADHD, I've got, you know, autism, or like dyslexia or dyspraxia, they're just generally more healthier, happier workforces, because like mental health is such a massive part of, like, you know, it's a societal issue at the moment, and I think that, you know, work is such a massive part of our lives. Like, we spend more time with our colleagues than we do our actual families, and I myself, as you know, a woman that's been working in business and the corporate world, like, I love my job. Like, genuinely, it's like, do you know what, I love it. I love waking up in the morning and going to the office and being around, you know, a supportive work environment. And I feel like when I am supported, and I can be like myself, I don't need to be like, you know, X, Y, and Z. I'm actually like fulfilling like my potential, right? And I think that as a work, as employers, it's like we want our employees to maximize their potential, because if they're maximizing it, then we get more collaboration, we get better businesses, we get a healthier economy, right? Like, this is only a positive for everyone. So yeah, like I think it's really essential, and yeah, everything that everyone said today has been so interesting. I feel like I've learned myself, actually, from, you know, the different aspects of neurodiversity as well. We do have questions actually that are coming through. Now, I know that Jackie's like monitoring the Q&A, so excuse me if I've picked up any questions that are not supposed to be asked, but I think that there's one here that from Thomas, which looks like quite a good one, actually. So I'm just going to ask this out to the panel. Where is the line on reasonable adjustments? For example, should interview questions be provided a few hours or a few days beforehand? And if no people have the same disabilities, how can we be consistent? I think that's a brilliant question, Thomas. Opening it out to the panel.
Ooh, it is a good question. I think we're all pondering that question, right? There should be no limits to adjustments, because these are not special treatment. These are just getting us in line with what everyone else already easily can access. And I think Rachel said, you know, everyone should be given questions in advance. The trouble is, a lot of recruiters, and I do a lot of inclusive recruitment training sessions, a lot of recruiters, or the hiring managers in particular, maybe are not getting the panel together way in advance, or creating questions way in advance, because the job has been advertised and they're recruiting quickly. There's a high turnover, whatever's going on, is meaning that we can't necessarily be as organized, because the questions can't be written and provided in enough time. It's not special treatment. There should be no barriers at all to ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity to excel. I'm not sure if I answered that, but I just feel that I want to highlight it's not special treatment. It's making sure we all get an equitable chance to excel.
Any other thoughts from anybody? I have my own like take on this question, actually. Reasonable adjustment, they're different for everyone, right? Like my favorite term is in recruitment, when it comes to like diversity, equity, and inclusivity, my three favorite words: please don't bumble everybody into the same group. Like, you know, I see this a lot with women, you know, and it's like, well, yeah, we're half the population, but we've got different, you know, individual needs as women, right? And I think that, you know, it's down to the individual, right? Like, let's see people for the needs that they need in order to be productive, and let's create that environment. Because the truth is that, is it really that complicated? Is it going to cost the business like that much time? No, not really. The gains that you make by having those reasonable adjustments and have everyone be able to compete on a fair level playing field, like, this is what we need, right, in a forward thinking economy. This is critical. So it's like, let's keep it to the individual. Let's, like, you know, have conversations around, well, actually, what do you need? Do you need the questions like a couple of days before? Do you need them 5 minutes before? You know, what is it? Let's, like, cater it more like to people's specific needs. Yeah, I think that answers that. If no two people have the same disabilities, then how can they be consistent? I think sometimes, like, look, you know what, we're into agile, like, working now, right? Yeah. Let's be agile in our approach to people as well, right? Like, this methodology was invented for, like, communication and people, and it's about, like, well, you know, how can we adapt? How can we, you know, turn the corners that we need to be able to turn? So hopefully that's answered that question. Are there any other questions that anybody can see that might be good ones to ask? Jackie, if there's any ones that you want me to go through, heads up on from you would be really great at this point. If not, then I think I have one more question that we could go through. So what are the obstacles encountered in implementing initiatives to support neurodiverse candidates, and how might they be mitigated? And I think that it'd be really interesting to get David and Alex insights into that.
Alex?
Yeah, I can go first if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, again, I think a lot of workplaces think that putting in these adaptations, putting in these adjustments is going to cost a lot of money, going to take up a lot of time, going to be really difficult to put in place. And actually what I found is a lot of the things that many people with autism need are really easy and simple to put in place, don't cost a lot of money at all, and are really easy and simple to implement. And like we've mentioned before, you know, they're not things that, they're not special treatments, they're things that we need to put us on a level playing field. And many of the things that we may need are actually going to benefit and be things that other people will also find really, really useful. Again, I've mentioned it before, but once you make the workplace accessible and inclusive for people who are neurodiverse, you're probably making it more accessible and inclusive for people who are not neurodiverse. So it really is a win-win situation. When you're putting in things in place for one group of people, it will probably mean that those things will work for another group of people as well.
Thanks, Alex. I would say I just see a thread in what you've shared today, Alex, and I just want to draw on that before I add my views on this. It's about the human touch. It's about, you said, when you arrive for interview, having a personal connection, finding something relatable that can relax that person, but having an individualized approach, seeing the person as the human individual that they are, and not having special treatment, but just treating a person in a way that shows a compassion and understanding for their needs. For me, though, in relation to this question, the main obstacle, I believe, and I'm glad we're all here today, the main obstacle is the lack of knowledge and awareness about the various neurotypes. We might have a surface understanding, but we might look too much at the challenges and not look at the strengths and the great things that come with having a neurodiverse workforce. I think if we can look at that, understand that more, do some learning, then we can celebrate the valuable differences that people can bring to the table. You know, first, we need, as we're doing today, just to raise awareness, but that then needs to translate into some action. What are we going to do moving forward from today? I would love everyone who's attended to make a note. My action will be this, individually or as an organisation. What are we going to do better to make sure we get the right candidates through the door?
Thanks so much. Okay, so we're gonna have to wrap up now because actually we're out of time. So we're coming towards the end. I'd like to invite all of each of us to think about our top tips, our takeaways from today's session, and yeah, over to the panel. What are the final takeaways from everyone? Rachel? Oh, sorry, Alex, yeah.
Alex, you can go first.
Okay, sorry. No, I was just going to say, just remember that everyone who is neurodiverse, everyone who has autism is completely different. No two people are the same, and whilst one person may need one thing putting in place, it may be completely different for the next person. But and also, I'd just like people to remember that actually, yes, there are challenges of being neurodiverse, there are challenges of having autism, but there are also many, many positives, and what I like to call superpowers of having or being different as well.
Rachel?
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've covered a lot today, and I can understand if people are feeling overwhelmed. I mean, we understand what it's like to feel overwhelmed because we're neurodivergent. It's something we experience a lot. But I just wanted to say that if you're not sure about where to start, it doesn't matter because you've already started. You've started on your inclusion journey just by turning up here and having that attitude, wanting to listen to neurodivergent people and think about it and learn more and be prepared to take an action. That's the single most important thing that you can do for inclusion, and you've already done it. So well done to you.
I'll jump in then. For me, echo what's been said today. It's been a great session. I'm pleased so many people were able to attend. Lovely to be part of this. We've got a legal obligation, yes we do, but ultimately don't we just have an ethical and moral obligation to ensure that everyone can harness their potential in life and really access the work that they can do, and to do it to the best of their ability with our support? Because it's not a benevolence, it's not a patronizing thing to employ a neurodivergent employee. You're doing yourself a bigger favor than you're doing them. We're not needing special treatment, we're needing to have equitable access so that we can fulfill our potential and benefit any organization that we are lucky enough to become part of.
Absolutely, and I echo all of the comments there. I would say that I'm going to leave it at this. Let's not bundle everyone together, right? We're all individuals, we're all very, very different, and we have individual needs. And being neurodivergent is a superpower. It has been my superpower. Like God and I only know how I managed to graduate from university without knowing how to read or write. I mean, come on. We have remarkable skills. We are assets to any single organization, and it's really okay to not be the same as another person. Let's celebrate our individuality. Let's celebrate our uniqueness. We don't need to look the same. We don't need to walk the same. We don't need to talk the same. We're neurodivergent, and that's brilliant. And I think, this has been such an interesting conversation. We've had such an overwhelming response as well, which I'm really happy about. It means that everyone's been very engaged. So I'm really pleased about that. On behalf of jobs.ac.uk, I'd like to thank you for hosting this and giving us the opportunity to speak today, and our amazing panelists for their time today. And thank you all for watching us. And I hope that you found the session as insightful as I did, and helpful as well. If you've got any questions, please reach out to the team. And I'm going to say goodbye to everybody now.